I used to believe losing my key that night was the worst thing the storm could take from me. I did not understand that sometimes a locked door is simply how another one finds the courage to open. The snow had been falling since late afternoon, but by the time I left the office, the city had nearly disappeared beneath it. Streetlights floated like pale yellow moons behind the windshield. My wipers worked furiously, clearing the glass for half a second before another curtain of white swept across it. I kept both hands on the steering wheel. The heater was running at full strength, yet my fingers still felt cold. All I wanted was home. My chair beside the window. A glass of red wine. A book. Silence. Predictable things had always comforted me. And that night the entire world seemed determined to be unpredictable. The drive that normally took 20 minutes took almost an hour. Cars were scarce. Snowbanks gathered along the sidewalks, and every intersection seemed strangely abandoned. When I finally turned into the underground entrance of my building, relief loosened something between my shoulders. Then I noticed a rectangle of warm light several floors above me. Maya's apartment. I recognized it immediately, which irritated me more than it should have. Her living room light was still on. For one brief second, I thought I saw a figure near the window. Maya perhaps looking down toward the entrance as my headlights swept across the snow. I told myself I was imagining it. I parked, gathered my purse and coat and hurried inside. The lobby smelled faintly of wet wool, and the evergreen arrangement the building manager insisted on keeping through February. The elevator hummed upward while melted snow gathered around my boots. When the doors opened on my floor, the hallway was almost unnaturally quiet. No music behind Maya's wall. No footsteps. Only the low mechanical whisper of the heating system. I reached my apartment and slipped one hand into my purse. Nothing. I tried the side pocket, then the smaller pocket. Receipts. Lip balm. My wallet. No key. I frowned and searched again, slower this time. Then faster. I checked my coat pockets. Empty. I set everything on the hallway carpet and searched the purse a third time, as though the key might appear if I became sufficiently annoyed. It did not. I stood there staring at my locked door, snow melting from the hem of my coat, and felt an absurd little pulse of disbelief. I was Claire Bennett. I remembered appointments 6 months in advance. I paid bills early. I kept spare batteries labeled by size. I did not lose keys. And yet, on the worst winter night of the year, the one place I wanted to be was 3 inches beyond a door I could not open. Behind me, from Maya's apartment, came the faintest shift of sound. I turned toward her door before I could stop myself. The sound stopped almost immediately, and I told myself Maya had simply moved something inside her apartment. Nothing more. I turned back to my own problem. First, I emptied my purse onto the carpet with the precision of someone conducting an investigation. Wallet, phone, reading glasses, a small notebook, 2 pens, hand cream, receipts I had apparently been carrying since October. Still no key. I checked every pocket of my coat again, including one I knew perfectly well was empty. Then I went downstairs. The elevator seemed slower than usual, perhaps because irritation has its own sense of time. In the garage, the temperature had dropped enough that my breath showed faintly as I crossed toward my car. I searched beneath the driver's seat, between the console and the passenger seat, inside the cup holders, and finally the trunk, although there was no reasonable explanation for how my apartment key could have ended up beside an emergency blanket and a grocery bag. Nothing. I called the building's after-hours number. A recorded message informed me that emergency maintenance was dealing with weather-related issues, and that response times were significantly delayed. I left my information, then called the locksmith whose number the building provided. He sounded exhausted. "I can get there," he said, "but with these roads I cannot promise when." "An hour?" I asked. There was a pause. "Probably longer." Of course. I thanked him because apparently good manners survive even when common sense abandons you. By the time I returned upstairs, my hands were cold again and my patience had become dangerously thin. Maya's door remained closed. Warm light showed beneath it in a narrow golden line. I stared at that line for perhaps 2 seconds too long. Knocking would have been sensible. Maya was awake. She was 20 feet from my apartment. We knew each other's names. She had held elevators for me, and once rescued an orange that escaped my grocery bag with considerably more grace than I had shown. Still, asking her for help felt strangely impossible. I had spent months establishing myself as the older woman next door who preferred less music, fewer hallway conversations, and apparently the emotional accessibility of a bank vault. I could hardly knock now and announce that Claire Bennett, defender of self-sufficiency, had misplaced the one object required to enter her own home. So I made the mature decision. I picked up my purse and headed toward the elevator, intending to sit in my car until the locksmith arrived. My finger had almost reached the button when I heard a lock turn behind me. Maya's door opened. Warm yellow light spilled across the hallway carpet. She stood there in soft gray sweatpants and a dark green sweater, her hair loosely pulled back, looking nothing like the energetic neighbor I usually encountered rushing through the lobby. Her eyes moved from my purse to my coat, then to my apartment door. "Claire," she said. "Are you okay?" I straightened automatically. "Perfectly." Maya looked at the elevator, then at the scattered damp marks my boots had left between it and my door. One corner of her mouth lifted. "You know," she said gently, "you do not look perfectly okay." I considered telling her that appearances were misleading, but the fact that I was standing in a hallway wearing a damp coat while waiting for a locksmith made that argument difficult to defend. "I misplaced my key," I admitted. Maya blinked once. Not dramatically. Somehow that made it worse. "Your apartment key? There is only one key currently relevant to my humiliation." Her mouth twitched, but she was kind enough not to laugh. "How long until someone can let you in?" "The locksmith said he would come when the roads allow it." Maya glanced toward the window at the end of the hallway. Snow swept past the glass in thick white sheets. "That sounds encouragingly specific." "I thought so." "And your plan is what?" "Wait. Where?" I looked toward the elevator. Maya followed my gaze. "In your car. It has heat." "Claire, it is freezing outside." "I am aware of winter." This time she laughed softly. I should have been annoyed. Instead, something about the sound made my embarrassment slightly less unbearable. Maya stepped back from her doorway. "Come inside." I stared at her. "That is not necessary." "Probably not. Still a better idea than sitting in a parking garage for 3 hours." "It will not be 3 hours." Maya raised an eyebrow. Outside, wind pressed against the building with a long, low whistle. 2.5 then. I almost smiled. Almost. "I appreciate the offer." That sounded suspiciously like a polite refusal. It was a very polished, polite refusal. I noticed. She did not push. That mattered. Maya simply rested one hand against the open door and said, "All right, but my door is staying open for another 30 seconds while you reconsider." Then she stepped away, leaving the decision entirely mine. Warm air reached me from inside. So did the faint smell of coffee, something citrusy, and whatever candle she had burning somewhere beyond my view. I looked toward the elevator again, then at my own locked door, then at hers. Months earlier, I had stood outside that same door prepared to complain about music. Now I was standing there because the woman behind it had offered me shelter from a storm. The irony was irritatingly complete. 20 seconds, Maya called from somewhere inside. "You are enjoying this." "A little. That makes one of us." 15. I exhaled and crossed the hallway. Maya reappeared, but there was no triumph on her face. Only a small warm smile. She moved aside. I stopped at the threshold. It was ridiculous that a single step could feel consequential. Her apartment was only inches beyond my shoes. I had spent months imagining it through bass notes, footsteps, laughter, and the occasional closing door. I thought I knew what existed on the other side of that wall. Then I stepped inside. Maya quietly closed the door against the cold, and the first thing I realized was how completely wrong I had been. For months, I had imagined Maya's apartment as a cheerful disaster. I expected abandoned coffee cups, shoes scattered across the floor, perhaps a speaker large enough to explain every bass note that had ever traveled through my wall. Instead, I found warmth. Not perfection. Warmth. A tall plant leaned toward the living room window, its leaves catching the amber light from a floor lamp. Books filled 2 shelves beside the sofa, some standing upright, others stacked sideways with folded notes tucked between their pages. A wooden desk sat near the window with a laptop, a ceramic mug full of pens, and several pages covered in handwriting. There were framed photographs on a narrow console, a small record player beside a row of albums, and a blue sweater draped carelessly over the back of a chair. That sweater reassured me. At least one part of my judgment had survived. "You can take off your coat," Maya said. I realized I was still standing near the door, as though entering farther required additional permission. Right. My fingers were stiff enough that the zipper resisted me. Maya noticed but did not comment. She disappeared briefly and returned with a thick towel. "For your hair." "My hair is fine." A cold drop slid from my temple to my cheek. Maya looked at it, then at me. Naturally. I accepted the towel. "Thank you." "There. We are making progress." I gave her a look, and she smiled before walking toward the kitchen. The apartment smelled faintly of orange peel and coffee, with something warmer underneath, perhaps cinnamon. Soft music played from a small speaker on the counter. Quietly. Almost suspiciously quietly. "I do know where the volume button is," Maya said without turning around. I stared at her. I did not say anything. "You did not have to." There was amusement in her voice but no resentment. She filled a kettle and set it on the stove. I wandered 2 steps farther into the living room, drawn to one of the photographs. Maya stood beside an older woman on a beach, both laughing into the wind. Another showed Maya holding a paintbrush while someone outside the frame appeared to have put blue paint across her cheek. These were ordinary photographs, yet they unsettled me slightly because they belonged to a life I had never considered. Through the wall Maya had been noise, footsteps, keys, laughter. Standing inside her home, I was confronted with evidence that she existed during all the hours I had not been listening. "Tea?" she asked. "Please." She handed me a mug a few minutes later. Our fingers did not touch, but I noticed how carefully she held it until she was certain I had a firm grip. "You are still cold." "I will recover." "I have no doubt." I sat on the edge of her sofa, wrapping both hands around the mug. Outside, the storm blurred the windows white. Inside, the music remained low. The lamp cast soft light across the books, and Maya settled into the chair opposite me instead of crowding the sofa. She gave me space without making a performance of it. That was when an uncomfortable thought arrived. Perhaps I had not misunderstood her apartment. Perhaps I had misunderstood her. For several minutes, neither of us said anything important. Maya asked whether the tea was warm enough. I asked whether the storm was supposed to continue through morning. We discussed road conditions with the seriousness of diplomats avoiding a more dangerous subject. Then my phone buzzed. The locksmith had sent a message saying he was delayed indefinitely by the weather, but would contact me when he could reach the building. I placed the phone beside my mug. "Good news?" Maya asked. "That depends on how generously you define the word indefinitely." She laughed. "Then you are officially stranded. Temporarily inconvenienced." "Of course. Claire Bennett is never stranded." I looked at her over the rim of my mug. "You have known me for approximately 5 hallway conversations." 6. You counted. Apparently. Something about that answer stayed with me, although I pretended otherwise. Maya stood and carried her empty cup toward the kitchen. "Would you like some wine?" she asked. "I have a bottle open, and unless your locksmith develops wings, we may be here a while." I hesitated, then nodded. "1 glass." I would never challenge a woman who organizes her inconvenience this efficiently. "You are becoming very comfortable making observations about me. You make it easy." She poured 2 modest glasses and returned, handing mine across the coffee table. This time I was careful not to notice her hands. I failed. Maya settled back into the chair. The music changed to something familiar, and I recognized the melody before I could stop myself. She caught the flicker on my face. "Wait." Her eyes narrowed playfully. "You know this song." "I have heard it." "Through the wall." "Repeatedly." Maya covered her smile with her glass. "So you have been listening." "Listening suggests consent." "Fair point." There was a pause. Then she said, "I suppose this is where we discuss my criminal history with the volume control." I felt heat rise into my face that had nothing to do with the tea. "You know about the complaint." I had a theory. "Maya, the music was genuinely loud." "I know." Her answer surprised me. She looked down at her wine. "I was careless." I lived in a detached house before this place. I was not used to sharing walls. I had prepared myself for defensiveness. Instead, she had simply admitted it. I could have spoken to you directly, I said. You almost did. I stared at her. Maya smiled. I saw you outside my door one night through the peephole. You stood there for about 10 seconds and disappeared. I closed my eyes briefly. Wonderful. For what it is worth, you looked extremely determined. I was hoping to forget that evening. I am glad I did not. I opened my eyes. She was smiling but gently. No accusation. No triumph. And somehow I started laughing. Not politely. Actually laughing. Maya joined me, and for a few seconds the storm, the missing key, and months of irritation became absurd rather than important. When the laughter faded, I realized I was sitting comfortably in her living room, holding wine, listening to one of the songs I had once wanted silenced. Stranger still, I was not thinking about leaving. The laughter left behind a different kind of quiet. Not awkward exactly. Softer. Outside, wind brushed snow against the windows in long, restless waves. But inside Maya's apartment, the storm had begun to feel farther away. I took another small sip of wine and noticed that my shoulders had finally relaxed. So, Maya said, turning her glass slowly between her fingers, what does Claire Bennett do when she is not filing noise complaints against innocent neighbors? I gave her a level look. We established that you were not entirely innocent. Fair. I accept partial guilt. How generous. She smiled. You never talk about yourself. We have mostly communicated in elevators. Elevators have at least 40 seconds of excellent conversational potential. I prefer using them for transportation. Maya laughed again, then her expression softened. You like things predictable. It was not really a question. I glanced toward the window. There are worse qualities. I did not say there were. That stopped me. Maya was not teasing now. Predictable can be peaceful, I said. Knowing where things belong. Knowing what tomorrow morning looks like. I find that comforting. I expected her to tell me I needed more spontaneity. People who loved spontaneity often treated stability like a character flaw. Maya only nodded. I understand that. Do you? More than you think. She looked toward the record player. I make a lot of noise because silence can get too loud sometimes. The sentence was simple, almost casual, but something underneath it made me hesitate. Maya did not explain, and I did not ask her to. Not yet. Instead I said, you seem comfortable with chaos. That is because you only see me arriving home with 3 grocery bags and dropping my keys. You drop them frequently. And yet you know exactly what they sound like. I looked at her. Maya's smile returned, smaller this time. You are not the only person who notices things, Claire. I felt strangely exposed. What exactly have you noticed? Your kitchen light comes on around 6:30 most mornings. On Saturdays later. You usually get home before 7 unless you are working late. You read by the window. And around 10:30, your living room light goes out. I stared at her. That sounds mildly alarming when listed together. I knew you would say that. Then why list it? Because you look surprised. I was. More than surprised. For months I had thought of myself as the observer. I knew Maya's footsteps, her music, the rhythm of her door. It had never occurred to me that my own quiet life made sounds too. Left patterns. Cast light beneath doors and across windows. I thought you barely noticed me, I said before I could reconsider the sentence. Maya's expression changed. The humor faded, leaving something gentler. I notice you. 3 ordinary words. Nothing more. Yet they landed somewhere unexpectedly deep. I lowered my eyes to my wine, suddenly interested in the reflection of the lamp across the glass. I had spent years becoming very good at needing little from anyone. I had mistaken being undisturbed for being unseen, perhaps because the difference had never mattered before. Sitting there while the storm erased the city outside, I realized Maya had been watching the light in my windows just as I had been listening for the sounds behind her wall. And for the first time that night, the warmth I felt had nothing to do with the room. I should have changed the subject after that. Instead, I stayed quiet long enough for Maya's words to settle between us. The music had softened to a slow piano melody, almost hidden beneath the wind. Maya leaned forward to place her glass on the coffee table, and when she sat back, the distance between us seemed smaller than I remembered. Nothing had actually changed. I knew that. Still, I became aware of details I had no practical reason to notice. The loose strand of hair near her cheek. The warmth in her voice when she stopped joking. The faint citrus scent I had noticed when I first entered, now mixed with coffee and the clean smell of winter drying from my coat. "You are thinking very hard," Maya said. "That is generally preferable to the alternative." "Not always." Spoken like someone who loses her keys frequently. "I do not lose keys." She paused. "That was insensitive considering your current situation." I smiled despite myself. Remarkably, Maya reached for the wine bottle at the same moment I moved my glass aside. Our fingertips touched. Barely. An ordinary accident. Yet my hand stopped for one strange second, as if my body had received information my mind had not. Maya looked at me. Her eyes remained on mine a fraction longer than necessary. Then she moved her hand away. No teasing. No meaningful smile. She simply asked, "More wine?" "No, thank you." My voice sounded perfectly normal, which I considered an achievement. I blamed the reaction on exhaustion. Then the wine. Then the abrupt change from cold to warmth. I had several reasonable explanations available, and intended to use all of them. Maya tucked one leg beneath herself in the chair. "Can I ask you something? You appear capable. Do you ever get tired of doing everything alone?" The question should have annoyed me. Instead, perhaps because she asked without pity, I answered, "Sometimes doing things alone is easier." That was not what I asked. I looked toward the window. Snow continued moving through the darkness, but more gently now. "People confuse solitude with loneliness," I said. "I like my own company." "I believe you." Maya's voice was quiet. "I like mine too." I turned back to her. "Then why ask?" She considered that. "Because liking your own company does not mean you never wish someone else understood the quiet." I did not answer. She had somehow stepped around every defense I might have raised. There was no accusation in the sentence. No suggestion that my life was empty. Just recognition. Maya looked down at her hands. Sometimes people see someone who seems fine alone and decide that means she never needs to be asked if she wants company. Something tightened unexpectedly in my chest. I could have made a joke. Normally I would have. Instead I asked, "Is that what happens to you?" Maya looked up, surprised by the question. For a moment, the playful woman from the hallway disappeared completely. "Sometimes," she said. One word. Honest and unadorned. The wind whispered against the glass. I realized then that I no longer wanted the locksmith to arrive quite as quickly as I had before. After that, neither of us seemed interested in returning to safer conversation. We did not confess anything dramatic. We simply kept talking. Maya told me she sometimes played music because an apartment could feel too large when every room was silent. I admitted that I had chosen mine partly because the building seemed designed to keep the outside world at a respectful distance. "That sounds exactly like you," she said. "I am choosing to interpret that as a compliment." It was one. Sometime after midnight, my phone finally buzzed. The locksmith had made it across town but could not safely reach our building until morning. I should have been frustrated. Instead, I looked at the message and felt something embarrassingly close to relief. Maya read my expression incorrectly. "Bad news." "Morning," I said. "He will come in the morning. Then the sofa is yours." "Maya, I cannot impose on you all night." "You are not imposing. I can wait downstairs." She glanced toward the window where snow still swept past the glass. "You can. But that would be ridiculous." I opened my mouth. She lifted one hand. "And before you object, I have clean blankets, extra pillows, and absolutely no requirement that you entertain me. You have prepared an alarmingly complete argument. I have met you." That made me laugh again. The hour grew later. Maya brought me a pillow, and I insisted she stop treating me like an emergency guest. She informed me that emergency guests were probably less argumentative. I remember settling into the corner of the sofa while she sat in the chair with a book. The lamp beside her cast a soft pool of gold across the room. The storm had quieted to a faint brushing sound against the windows. I meant to close my eyes for only a minute. When I opened them again, the room was gray with early morning light. For a few seconds I did not know where I was. Then I felt the weight across my shoulders. A blanket. Soft, warm, carefully tucked around me. I sat up slowly. My wineglass had been cleared away. My phone was charging on the side table. Maya was asleep in the chair across the room, one hand resting loosely against the closed book in her lap. She had given me the sofa and taken the less comfortable place herself. I looked at her differently in that quiet morning light. There was no quick smile, no hallway energy, no music traveling through a wall. Just Maya. The woman who had noticed I was cold. The woman who had opened her door without making me feel foolish for needing somewhere warm. The woman who had covered me with a blanket after I fell asleep and asked for nothing in return. I touched the edge of the blanket with my fingertips. Months earlier, I had reduced her to sounds I wanted turned down. Sitting there beneath something she had quietly placed over me, I understood how little I had actually known. The realization did not feel dramatic. Felt worse. It felt personal. By the time Maya woke, the storm had softened into a pale snowfall drifting past the windows. She blinked at me from the chair, then looked toward the sofa. "You survived." "Barely. Your hospitality is dangerously comfortable. I will try to be less considerate next time." The words "next time" passed between us so casually that neither of us touched them. Maya made coffee while I folded the blanket with unnecessary precision. My phone rang shortly afterward. The locksmith had reached the building. Within 20 minutes, my apartment door would finally be open again. That should have felt like uncomplicated good news. Instead, I found myself looking around Maya's living room, as though I were leaving somewhere I had only just discovered. At the door I put on my coat. Maya leaned against the frame while I adjusted my scarf. Morning light made the hallway seem ordinary again. 2 neighboring apartments. 2 doors. A few feet of carpet between them. Nothing had changed technically. "Claire," Maya said. I turned. There was amusement in her eyes, but something gentler beneath it. "So, do you still hate me?" A day earlier, I would have had an answer prepared. Something dry and efficient. Instead, I looked at her and remembered the tea warming my hands, the laughter over the complaint, the quiet honesty in her voice, and the blanket I had awakened beneath. "I am willing to reconsider the evidence," I said. Maya smiled. "That sounds promising. Do not become overconfident." There she is. I shook my head, but I was smiling too. Then I crossed the hallway. The locksmith arrived minutes later, and soon I heard the familiar click of my own lock opening. I stepped inside. Everything was exactly where I had left it. My chair by the window, my book on the table, the wineglass in the cabinet, the silence I had spent years arranging so carefully around myself. Yet the apartment felt subtly different. I stood in the living room and looked at the wall separating Maya's home from mine. For months I had treated that wall like a shield. On the other side had been noise, inconvenience, disruption. Now there was a woman who drank her coffee from mismatched mugs, kept notes inside her books, noticed when my lights went out, and gave up her sofa without making me feel like a burden. Later that morning, music began softly through the wall. A song I recognized. I stopped halfway through opening my book. I waited for irritation. It never came. Instead, I smiled before realizing I was doing it. And that was the part one could not explain away with wine, exhaustion, or a snowstorm. I had spent months wanting Maya to turn the music down. Now, for the first time, I found myself wondering what ordinary reason I might have to knock on her door again. Sometimes a boundary does not disappear when you cross it. It simply stops feeling like somewhere you need to hide. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to Claire and Maya's story. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might enjoy it too.